Welcome to the Plain Talk Podcast. I'm your host, Rob Port. Normally at the beginning of these shows, I do a little bit of a monologue on the issues of the day, but not today's show. Today we have two interviews. The first is John Swanson. He is a vice president from Enbridge. We're going to talk a little bit about the process behind the Line 3 pipeline in Minnesota. Also, Senator Kevin Cramer joins for his weekly segment, taking your questions. Remember, anytime you want to send him your questions, you can do that, rob@sayanythingblog.com. We had a really good discussion today about a number of your questions. So those two interviews are coming up next, right after this. This episode of the Plain Talk Podcast is brought to you by Energy of North Dakota. Oil and natural gas from North Dakota strengthens all of America. And through our abundance of talents, innovations, and technologies, energy responsibly produced here translates to worldwide economic stability. With producers and our communities working together, we're securing a sustainable future that generation after generation can build on. It's all happening right now with Energy of North Dakota. Learn more at energyofnorthdakota.com. John Swanson joins me now. He is the vice president for execution of U.S. major projects onshore for Enbridge. John, that sure is a long job title. Do you make people call you that around? You walk around the office and say, "Hey, I need all of you to refer to me as the vice president for the execution of U.S. major projects onshore."
No. That's just a mouthful. I say, "Hey, I'm John Swanson. I'm Line 3." That's the easier thing to say.
John Swanson working on Line 3, which should be a name that is familiar to our audience. The Line 3 project. It's been, well, I suppose controversial is the right word for it. There's sure been a lot of wrangling about it now over two gubernatorial administrations. You know, there's been a lot of negotiations, and some of which, of course, is appropriate. Pipeline projects matter. They need to be done the right way, and we're all in favor of a rigorous process to make sure that they're being done the right way and everybody's rights are being respected and nobody's being put in any sort of undue harm or danger or anything like that. We want a rigorous process, but in recent years, I think thanks a lot to politics and some of the polarization of our time, these projects seem to be taking a lot longer than they should. Now, the Line 3 project, just to catch you up, it's an existing pipeline. Line 3's already been a thing. It's been a thing for a long time now. What's happening, though, is that, like a lot of infrastructure projects, it ages. And as it ages, eventually it needs to be replaced. So more accurately, it should be called the Line 3 replacement project, because that's what we're doing is we're replacing pipeline. John, recently I was just reading in the Associated Press. In fact, I'll read their lead here. Quote, Minnesota utility regulators have granted a final green light to Enbridge's proposed Line 3 crude oil pipeline replacement. The Public Utilities Commission on Tuesday, that's Tuesday this week, unanimously rejected the last pending petitions for reconsideration, including one from the state Commerce Department. The Commerce Department had joined with tribal and environmental groups in challenging the project's approvals before the Minnesota Court of Appeals, which sent the case back to the commission for procedural reasons last month. Governor Tim Walz says his administration will study Tuesday's decision before deciding its next steps. So what does this mean for the project at this point? Where are we? I mean, they said final green light, but I'm assuming shovels aren't hitting the ground just yet.
No, that's right. Shovels aren't hitting the ground just yet. It was a very small step, but it's very important in that it's really reaffirmation of the June 28th decision last year. The PUC unanimously voted to identify the need for the project, and then the 5-3 decision to support the route that was applied for. So, and between June 28th and then the petitions came out to reconsider. People tried to bring up new issues, new agendas. The PUC went back and looked at the voluminous record we have on this project and said, they've met all the requirements, and they put this forward and they demonstrated the need for the project. So with that, we move forward. Now, as of last year, we did need to wait for the written orders to come out as per the prior Dayton administration. He wanted the written orders to come out on those decisions before we could submit our applications. That took about 120 days, which means our applications to the Department of Natural Resources and the Pollution Control Agency and the Army Corps of Engineers went in late October last year. Actually, I take that back. The Corps has been in there for a little while, but they haven't been actively working on it until everybody was in that mix and working the issues. So we need to work with the Department of Natural Resources on crossing state lands and state waters. We need to work with the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency on certifying that our actions in terms of use or management of water, certifies that we're doing it with a high degree of quality to the water. We aren't degrading the water at all. And then, of course, the Corps, which primarily focused on navigable waterways, but also tribal consultation, other things like that. So those are the three elements we need to get in place.
How much of this, because this is a replacement project, how much of this pipeline is going in the original route where you're just digging up the old line and reburying new line?
Let's see. Probably close to about 150 miles total. And I'm just adding up the piece going through Fond du Lac plus the piece north of Clearbrook from the state border. So about 150 miles total.
How much, like give us that in the context. I mean, is that like 80%, 90% of the entire line?
It's 350 miles it's 150 miles out of 340 miles.
Okay.
So little less than half.
Okay. So this is the part that's being dug up and replaced. What I don't understand is this line. It's been in operation since the 1960s. Is that correct? Am I getting that right?
That's correct.
Okay. So since the 1960s, it's been operating. Why are we still needing to demonstrate that there's a need for this? I mean, it's been in place since the 1960s. Enbridge isn't going out of business anytime soon. In fact, you folks are you want to invest more money in this line, which to me tells me there's demand for the line. When we were debating the Dakota Access pipeline over here in North Dakota, that was a new project. And there were some people who argued, I don't think they were correct, but they argued that, there wasn't the market, the pipeline wasn't needed, et cetera, so therefore we shouldn't build it. That argument at least made sense, even if I disagreed with it, and I think the facts showed something different. I could understand why they were making it. Why are people making a need argument for a line that's existed since the 1960s? All you're doing is replacing it, just saying, hey, the old line's worn out, we need a new line. But clearly the line's still needed. It's been around since the 60s.
Well, there's a couple aspects I'll demonstrate, and I don't know if I'm going to get your question answered directly, but let me just take a little shot at it. So part of it is about 20 years ago, the federal government deregulated oil pipelines, which left it to the states to decide need and route. Now, on gas pipelines, the federal government still regulates those, but on oil pipelines, they do not. So I think the characterization I have is you look at a state like Minnesota that doesn't have any oil production at all, and they kind of question the need and the value for oil lines in the state. I think the second aspect to that is, as you said, we have this whole elevation about questioning fossil fuels going forward. We have the need. I think we can all understand, society's need for fossil fuels is going to be there for some time. And I'm like anybody else. I'd like to see a future where we can have a successful society and get away from fossil fuels. But that's a long, long ways away. So, but you put in that kind of debate with the perspective of Minnesota as a non-producing state, and I think it just becomes a natural order to question anything about why you would need that infrastructure. So I hope that helps to answer your question.
Well, I can tell you, living on the North Dakota side of the border, I think sometimes those of us who live in this part of the country, we're the joke I hear farmers make all the time is the people who shop at the supermarket don't really understand where their food comes from, right? Because they're far away from the farm. Maybe they've never visited a farm. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing. We all live different sorts of lifestyles, and that's okay. But I think sometimes there's an understanding gap there where if you're – so here in North Dakota, we're also close to where the oil comes out of the ground. I could –
that's right.
I could probably –
you can make the correlation. You can make the correlation between where the oil comes out of the ground and filling up your car.
I could walk out of my front door. I could walk out of my front door and walk. I'm within walking distance of an oil well where I live. So, that's I'm very close to where the oil comes out of the ground. And I think there's a disconnect there. Do you think, because to me, I'm looking at this, and to me, the regulatory process around a pipeline project like Line 3 is, is it going to be safely done? Are we checking all the boxes? Are we, do we have, are we prepared in case that, what's the plan if it leaks? All those things to make sure that this is a safe, responsibly built pipeline. To me, that's the proper debate to have. What worries me,
that's right.
What worries me is that sometimes we start having these pie in the sky debates about whether or not we ought to be using fossil fuels. Now, I'm more than happy to have that debate, and I think it's happening in the marketplace. And hey, if we find something better than oil down the road, I'm all for it, right? I'm a free market guy. If we find a better source than oil, let's go for it. But this isn't the right venue for that debate. This debate is, oil exists in the world. We're all using it. Unless we're willing to take a serious hit to our quality of life, we're going to continue to use it. So that being said, let's build safe pipelines, right? It seems like we're so far adrift from what should be the proper debate here, which is the Line 3 replacement project going to be done responsibly? Once we've checked those boxes, let's build the flipping pipeline.
You're exactly right. That is the debate we need to have, and that is the due diligence that we appreciate. That's why we made the decision to do an environmental impact study on the pipelines. The first time a pipeline's ever had an EIS study done on it in the state of Minnesota. So we want to take the high road, demonstrate that piece, and then from there it's now down to working with the agencies about water quality. Where do we make sure when we get storm water, how does that run off? What does that do in terms of erosion control devices and things like that? All the preliminary precautions we need to put in place during construction, and also the things we're going to do after construction to mitigate the results.
So why does it seem like there's so much extra? I mean, I was talking to a friend, and I told my friend, I got to record a podcast interview with this guy from Enbridge because they're still trying to get it approved, and the Public Utilities Commission just did this new thing. And her response was, wasn't that approved a long time ago? Like, what are we still doing? Like, that was sort of her response. And I guess what are we doing? I mean, how many times is the public utility? I mean, I realize that there's different aspects of it that they've had to sign off on, but I think from the public perception looking in, people who don't follow this stuff, the ins and outs of all of it, I think they're wondering, what are we still doing?
Well, and that's a good question. This has been a very long process. And like I said, we elected to do the EIS. That took more time, but we said, we're going to go through this process eyes wide open, and we're going to make sure that we close doors behind us as we move it forward. So it is, but once again, we talk about the excitement of what happened in North Dakota and the concern. And you have to remember, one of my fundamental rules is we don't pay our public officials to take risk. We don't. And in that sense, with all this activity and noise, opposition, whoever, it really puts them in a precarious position. And we have seen permits pulled in other states where maybe they got in a hurry, they didn't do things, but some of the opposition took it into a court of appeal. The judge looked at it and sided with the opposition and pulled those permits. Well, that's the worst thing you want to do is get into construction and see it done. So it is a long process. We're not complaining. We just want to make sure it gets done right every step of the way. That's all we can really do.
So speaking of steps, let's lay out and understanding that the process has certainly been unpredictable to this point, and I don't think that's going to stop. But I mean, what now? What's left until the shovels hit the ground?
Well, first let me say it does have some predictability, okay. And thanks to new Governor Walz, they got left to this situation. What did they do with this project? And they came back early March and said, we need 365 days to process the pollution control agency permits, everything now dependent upon that timeline. But that'll be processing. That'll be done end of October. And with subsequent efforts to get the stormwater permit and the core permits, which follow after those, we're looking at a January start of construction in North Dakota and Minnesota. So that's a really good thing. We now have a predictable timeline, which we have not had in a very long time. So that I want to thank, it was difficult for the administration to walk in, see what's facing them, and they dealt with it. So in that sense, it's been very good. But we need to work through with the with the state on the water quality and the DNR permits for state lands and state waters. We need to get the core permits, which are really around tribal consultation and navigable waters. And we've done a lot of tribal consultation within the state. We've also completed a tribal cultural survey. But you know what? We didn't complete it. We had the tribes do it. And it turned out to be an excellent work product, excellent job, and the Corps has what they need. Versus, that's where it kind of got upset and disjointed in North Dakota. So we're pleased with that. It is a long process. Would we like to go faster? Yes, but are we just going to make sure that every time we move forward, we close the doors behind us, and we're doing that? So in that sense, it is more time, but we're working with it.
Last question for you. When the shovels hit the ground, I mean, I remember that's what happened here in North Dakota is, they got busy. It started in the spring, and those workers got out there, and they got busy working, and we saw the protesters come in, so many of whom were peaceful, many of whom were just expressing their point of view, whether you or I agree with it or not. That's certainly their right, and there's not a thing in the world wrong with that. But others were, they committed crimes, frankly. I mean, they trespassed, they vandalized. It was ugly. Are you guys ready for that? I mean, I have heard some of the activists promise Dakota Access-style protests aimed at Line 3. Are you folks ready for that if it happens?
Well, we think so. You can never be prepared for anything in that sense, but here's what's happened. Number one, the Public Utilities Commission mandated that Enbridge support public safety. And so there is an effort within the state to organize resources, understand the risk assessment county by county, what they need to do to be prepared. Two, we put out our approach to this, which is we are looking not to escalate any situation. We do not have our own security. We have security, but it's more like surveillance to watch our equipment and report. We don't have anybody out there wielding guns or doing that kind of thing. We call the police, and we have our people stand down and back off and then try to re-engage. And in that sense, our line is pretty clear. If they start breaking the law, then we've got a legal issue. The last thing we've been doing is really trying to work very hard with the tribes, talking with them, working with them. We've made agreements with some. And in that sense, maybe there will be members of the tribe, just like there's members of society as a whole that want to go out there and protest. And they have the right to do that if they keep it legal. But if you don't have the tribe's councils activating, like what happened in North Dakota, we believe that's something that will keep it de-escalated as well. So we've been working real hard to make sure they understand us, how we can work together on this. And to be honest, we're finding if I can't talk for the tribes, but I think you would find a lot of people within the 7 to 8 affected tribes in Minnesota don't want to see that happen.
John, thanks for your time.
Hey, appreciate it.
Senator Kevin Cramer joins me now, as he does every week. Kevin, how you doing?
I'm doing very well, thanks, Rob.
Yeah, you Republicans are fresh off making Democrats show up and vote present for their own legislation, which is just terrible. The world's going to end in a global warming catastrophe in like 12 years, but we don't need to rush into any legislation or anything.
Well, it was really remarkable that the whole Green New Deal debate and discussion, and then exactly to your point, the vote. And I think what they wanted to do by voting present was not to admit defeat. And yet what they really did was, in my view, admit defeat, because every Republican voted against it, and then 4 Democrats voted against it. And not a single Democrat voted for the Green New Deal, while 13 of them co-sponsored it. So it really, it put them in a bad spot. I don't think there's any great secret that that it was some political maneuvering on the part of the majority leader, Mitch McConnell, who's very good at that sort of thing. But if you're gonna introduce legislation and be an original co-sponsor and advocate for it, even right up until the vote, they were holding rallies in support of it, and then not vote for it. You're probably not on a real solid foundation.
No, probably not. I wanted, obviously, the Green New Deal, I think maybe it's bad. I liked Senator Lee's presentation on it, where he was just, I'm going to give this all the seriousness it deserves. Here's Ronald Reagan on a dinosaur. It was kind of funny.
Yeah, exactly.
But I mean, maybe now we can move beyond this and have a real debate about actual workable policy that could properly balance, our energy needs with, the fact that we're moving into a future and we want to be prudent in our treatment of the environment. I mean, let's discuss real policy that has a real chance of passing.
Yeah, Rob, this is a great point you make right here, and I actually think you're right on point, because the Green New Deal did cloud the debate for a while. Because it was so fanciful and because it's just so outrageous, and it was introduced with such great fanfare, it was ripe for political gamesmanship. That said, I always said, when I was a surrogate for the candidate Donald Trump on energy and environmental policy, and I did 2 debates with Hillary Clinton's chief energy advisor, I always said it's regardless where you are in the global warming spectrum or what you believe about climate change and whose fault it is and to what degree it's man's fault. None of that really matters as much as the frightening thing about it were the solutions that Democrats were offering up. And so at the same time, as Republicans, we have an obligation, to offer up our solutions, and we have over the years. Some have passed, some have become laws. It relates to things like the tax code as it relates to research and development technology, particularly, credits for carbon capture, utilization, storage. All of these things are part of the bigger picture. But now with a divided government, I think as Republicans, the thing we have to be prepared for, and this is something, again, I'd love to hear from some of your listeners on, is what are we willing as conservatives, as people from, coal and oil and gas states, what is it we're willing to give to get, or what are we willing to, to lose to get something? And, that's oftentimes a tougher debate than a political, just a blatant political debate.
Yeah, it's certainly interesting. I wanted to ask you, switching gears here. Your opponent last year, Heidi Heitkamp's got a new gig. Mm-hmm. It's with the U.S. It's with an organization called here, and then I don't even get the name of it. It's some new group. I think actually a Republican organizer founded it, but it's I think American for Trade Works or something. Here, I'm looking it up now. Trade Works for America. I'm sorry, led by Republican Phil Cox. I didn't have that written down here. She's going to work for them. It's interesting because back during the campaign, she said she was disappointed in this trade deal. She didn't like it. Now she's going to work for an organization that's pushing for it. Has anything changed with the USMCA, or is it still the same agreement? We're just waiting for Congress to ratify it.
Well, the interesting thing is it can't change. That's the point of the TPA, or the Trade Promotion Authority. Congress cannot, they can't amend it after it was signed by the president and of the 3 countries. And so, no, nothing's changed. I know now there might be some discussion, but the other 2 countries, Mexico and Canada, have resisted calls for changes to it. I think maybe what could have happened, besides who's paying her, that can be a great motivator, who's paying you, but is that there's maybe a better understanding of its benefits. I talked to some union folks the other day, and I said, USMCA, and union folks did not support NAFTA. And some union folks today, organizations are opposing USMCA because they want stronger enforcement. And I should back up. It's really Democrats that say they oppose it unless it gets stronger protections for American workers. The reality is it's got stronger protections than the current NAFTA does. And so in talking to some union folks the other day, they agreed. And they said, no, we support it. We support USMCA. We're going to be encouraging Democrats to vote for USMCA. It is better than NAFTA. And trade does create jobs. And we're already seeing, I think we've seen something like, several thousand, tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, new manufacturing jobs since the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, for example. So we are seeing some manufacturing come back. Maybe it's 500,000 manufacturing jobs. And so we do want to be able to do trade. Unions are seeing the value of trade. And so, maybe she just had a change of heart after learning more about the deal. We'll give her the benefit of the doubt.
Yeah. Where are we at on approving that? I mean, obviously this coalition is this Trade Works for America that former Senator Heitkamp's going to be working for. I mean, they're just forming, so I'm assuming there's a sales pitch to be done here to win some people over to get this thing through Congress. So where are we at on it?
Mm-hmm. So it's a great question because we asked the president that very question just yesterday. He had lunch with the Republican senators. And, again, back to Trade Promotion Authority, what happens is there are all these specific timelines that kick in as a result of it. And so that's why the trade deal was finalized, signed at the time it was, because you got to go 60 days before the next phase and 30 days before the next phase. And without going into all the details, frankly, I don't know them off the top of my head. The next phase would be the president or the U.S. trade representative delivering the final product to the Congress. That can't happen for about a little better than a month from now, I believe. I think it's just into May that can happen. So the president said yesterday that it will be delivered within the first hour that it's statutorily available to us. Then it will be up to groups like the group that the senator is working for, Chamber of Commerce and other pro-trade groups. They'll be lobbying Congress to vote to ratify it. And I don't think it'll have much trouble in the Senate. They're anticipating some trouble in the House. I think I just saw a report today where one of the lead Democrats in the House thought that the president would have to get 30 Democratic votes in the House to pass it. I do think that'll happen. I know that they don't want him to have a victory on this or anything else. However, trade is just so important to so many of these congressional districts that it seems like it'd be pretty politically risky to let every Democrat vote against ratification. But we need some groups to hold them accountable for sure.
Let's get into some questions. Daryl asks if you're and I'm paraphrasing here because he kind of wrote a long question, but essentially he's asking if your recent criticism of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers over the border wall and your expressed support, for instance, he's quoting you in a tweet here where you said, I quote, if you tasked a private North Dakota contractor to build a wall, he would start tomorrow. Daryl's question is if you're just doing that because Fisher Industries out of Dickinson, I mean, they're obviously in the running to have some level of involvement in building the wall. Is that just you trying to throw some business their way?
It is not actually. Fisher does represent a very good illustration of what I'm talking about, and not surprising that a North Dakota company or a company that gets started in North Dakota could do that. But it's illustrative of the frustration I feel with the Corps of Engineers on lots of fronts, and not just the Corps, but lots of the bureaucracy. And that is, they haven't built walls that were funded in the 2017 fiscal year, much less 2019 fiscal year. Largely because they're a bureaucracy, because they do a lot of planning, they do a lot of, CYA, they do a lot of, conference calls and meetings and, designing and whatnot. And they don't get to the building. And partly, Rob, because they don't have an incentive to. And this is the difference between the private sector and the public sector. There's no natural incentive for government bureaucracy to do anything that they're supposed to do because you can't discipline them in any way, at least not easily. And so, whereas a private sector firm, they're judged on the product, they are paid based on deliverables, and so it's natural. And while obviously it's a great illustration, and wouldn't it be great? I'd love to have a North Dakota company building the wall. I've not ever advocated directly for Fisher in any way on it, but again, a company like that makes a lot of sense to me.
Via Facebook, Jeff asks, ask him how he feels about eliminating Special Olympics funding and other special needs funding and giving charter schools increases. And this is a response. Education Secretary Betsy DeVos has proposed cut. Now, I don't think this is the first time she's proposed these. My understanding is she's proposed these previous years. For whatever reason, I think it's getting a lot of attention now. Maybe the cuts are deep. I don't know. But anyway, I mean, she's proposing some cuts, and some of which would target Special Olympics. So how do you feel about that situation?
Well, I think you mentioned about charter schools getting increases. I don't know that charter schools need increases. I think schools in general would do well to do as well as charter schools are doing. And North Dakota's the only state in the country that doesn't allow charter schools. It's something that escapes me completely. I don't know how we can, as a state, be the only state that doesn't allow charter schools. Where they have been tried, they have worked tremendously well. They're not subject to the union. They have more of those natural market forces and incentives built in. So I don't know what one has to do with the other. Special Olympics is a wonderful organization, and from a government standpoint, I suppose a conservative can make the case that the government doesn't need to be into that, but I think they do. I think Special Olympics is worth supporting for lots of reasons, not the least of which is the testimony, the witness of Special Olympics is important to the fiber, the culture of our country and the moral fiber of our country, and it's a pittance compared to the things we waste a lot of money on in other areas. But I don't think the two go together necessarily. Maybe she's doing both, but I have serious doubts that cuts to Special Olympics has much of a chance in the Congress of the United States. And I'd like to see more charter schools, including in North Dakota.
Well, that's my understanding is that she has. I think what's happening is these are her proposals for the overall budget, and I think people are drawing and compare. I think they're trying to. It's the parade of horribles, right? When people don't like it, they try to find them. And obviously, Special Olympics. We all know Special Olympics. It's a very sympathetic area of spending where a lot of people are like, well, yeah, I support the Special Olympics. Just some figures. I think the overall Special Olympics budget, and I'm reading here in a USA Today article. I mean, their overall budget, something like $124 million a year. The cut that Secretary DeVos is proposing is $17.6 million, just to provide some context there, because obviously they have Special Olympics gets private donations. They have other sources of revenue other than the federal government. The federal government's share is $17.6 million. And according to USA Today, Congress has defeated previously her proposals on this front. So this isn't like the first time she's proposed it. It sounds like somebody got wind of it, and now they're engaging in some alarmism, maybe. Let's see here. Kyle, via Facebook, asks, he has a subcommittee hearing today to examine military space operations, policy, and programs. Could he let us know how it is going with the Space Force? Elizabeth Warren is on the committee. Is she in favor of the Space Force?
So, good. Yeah, he's right. The hearing just wrapped up a little bit ago. It's actually a subcommittee hearing on the topic. I subcommittee serve on, of course, strategic forces. So it's a great question because Space Force as a sixth branch of the military is a new concept that has been introduced by the president, led to a great degree out of the White House by the vice president. Our military leaders that I talk to, by and large, are very supportive of the concept of a Space Force. Now, we already have a Space Command. One of the areas I would tell you that I was concerned about, let me just finish the thought in fairness to the question. The hearing today was not about Space Force, but rather about the Space Command as it currently exists and the acquisition process for Space Command. I think it's called the National Security Space Agency, something like that. But anyway, it was specific to that. But with regard to Space Force, it's so brand new. I'm actually going to try to get language in the National Defense Authorization Act to encourage the continued development of Space Force. I've spent a lot of my time here talking to the various combatant commanders and the secretaries of the various branches, particularly the Air Force. I think that the president did a very good thing when they shifted from a standalone agency to a division within the Air Force. I think that makes all the sense in the world. I think it's efficient, bureaucratic efficiency, and that it made me much more comfortable in that realm. But it does deserve attention because space is the new domain without question. It's not even all that new. And while we may still have an edge, our adversaries, particularly China and Russia, are beating us to the punch. They are investing much more than we are in the technologies, many of the technologies we have invented, things like hypersonic missiles, direct energy, which is lasers, and the ability to communicate as well as fight the war, if you will, in space is really, really important. I also happen to think it presents a tremendous opportunity for a couple of North Dakota's bases and military bases to play a major role. Not that they don't already, they do.
Well, I think so. I feel like space, I mean, during when former President Kennedy lined us up for the moonshot, right? That's where that term comes from. I mean,
Right.
it was a new frontier, right? I mean, it was,
That's
you
right.
know, and we were, I mean, there was very much a component there where we were racing the Soviets into space. We didn't want them to get there first and to plant their flag and to have, you know, dominance over space. We wanted to get there too. So I think there's people who resist this on the idea, well, we're militarizing space. Well, there's always kind of been that facet, and you can't ignore it because we're human beings, and unfortunately,
Right.
you know, when one group of human beings gets an advantage over another group of human beings, you know, they use it, and I like it because I feel like if we had a space force, it's a shift in, you know, just from being a primarily exploratory, you know, strictly scientific function to a recognition that, you know, space is a place where humanity is going to go. And, you know, Americans need to be there and be part of that and be part of the race. So I like it. I hope we make progress on that in the right way.
Well, I do too, but you know, space is beyond even that right now because so much of our communications is dependent on satellites, including our warfighting communications. You really have to have a resilient space infrastructure that keeps a close eye on your adversaries, as well as, you know, a deterrent, if you will, to aggression. So it's much like the nuclear triad. It really becomes a deterrent. And if you're not in that domain, Rob, and China and Russia are in that domain, and they see the opportunity through various technologies to gain not just an advantage, but literally, you know, take us out, for example. That's. I don't want to sound alarmist, but I think that Americans need to know a lot more than we know about the advancements of our adversaries.
Hey, us we science fiction nerds have been following this for a long time.
Yes.
We know all about the need to control space. It's the high ground for the entire globe.
It's the high ground.
You know,
Yep.
so, you know, we got to get there. All right, well, we're moving on here. Brian emails, and again, kind of has a long, complicated question, but he's worried about Republicans weakening the legislative filibuster. And so he's quoting James Wallner, who is a former Senate Steering Committee Executive Director, expert on Senate procedure. He wrote an article, and he says that in 2017, and I'm paraphrasing here, Majority Leader McConnell pledged not to abolish the legislative filibuster. That's how he got people to come along to use the nuclear option to confirm Neil Gorsuch.
Right.
Since he is now trying to pass a resolution authored by Senator Roy Blunt and James Lankford from Oklahoma that would speed up the confirmation process by changing the standing rules of the Senate, yet he wants to use the nuclear option to pass that resolution over objections. And he is saying that this is a threat to the legislative filibuster. So if people who are their eyes are glazing over and they're confused,
Yep.
we have gotten rid of the filibuster for judicial nominees. The Democrats started that ball rolling. Republicans finished it. We don't filibuster judicial nominees anymore, but we still have it for legislation. So that would be like if we're gonna, you know, pass a bill outlawing widgets or something, some policy bill, it's still got to get through the filibuster process. And he's worried that we're going to get rid of that. He obviously supports the filibuster. I'll be honest, I support the filibuster. I look at it as a sort of mandate for some level of bipartisanship. So what do you make of this situation? Is there a threat to the legislative filibuster here?
Well, not as much as one as I might wish there was, frankly, in some respect. But just to clarify a couple things, what the leader is talking about and what Senator Blunt and Senator Lankford's rule does is it doesn't change we would not use the filibuster for a simple majority to change the rules of the standing rules on confirmations of sub-cabinet officials and judges lower than the appellate court. Right now, there's 30 hours of debate that are allowed each time you go to cloture of debate. 30 hours. Well, that means, you know, we have about 100 judges in the queue right now, judge confirmations, nominations in the queue, and the Democrats are using every one of those. And by the way, sub-cabinet members like assistant deputy secretaries, general counsel to the IRS, a chief economist for this agency or that, and they're asking for 30 hours of debate on every one of those. Well, obviously, in a presidential term, that means you don't fill the cabinets, which we haven't done. But to put it in a different perspective, in the first 2 years of Donald Trump's presidency, Democrats demanded cloture. That is the 30 hours of debate, 128 times. 128 filings for cloture. In the previous 6 presidents, the grand total was 24. And so the abuse of the minority, every rule and regulation is oftentimes a response to an abuse. The abuse of the minority in this particular case is forcing this hand. Now, before anybody loses their mind over the history of this, all we would be doing is by lowering the number on these lower level nominations from 30 hours of debate to 2 hours of debate. And by the way, we had a recent one where they used 4 minutes of the 30 hours to debate the confirmation. 4 minutes of the 30 hours. The rest was just the clock ticking. During which time, by the way, the Senate floor can't be used for any other legislation. That's the rules of the Senate. So they use it to paralyze the Senate because they don't like Donald Trump. But what we'd be doing is returning the confirmation rules to the same as they were under President Obama. And by the way, we're willing, even with a simple majority, to change the rules permanently. So in other words, we'll live with them as the minority. These are not unreasonable things to expect from our Senate. And if the Democrats don't want to help us change those rules, we'll change them. And yes, it'll apply to the rest of Donald Trump's term and his next term if he has one. But it'll also be used for the next Democratic president. So we just kind of want to remove those politics. It's just really, really ridiculous what they've done. With regard to legislative, it doesn't require. You're right to this point. We're not applying it to legislative. I made a little bit of a wisecrack. I think we should eliminate the filibuster for appropriations process as well. I just think the founders didn't create the filibuster. There was no 60-vote margin. The Senate was to be the filibuster with its equal representation by each state. That was the backstop. I think in many respects, Rob, while I think protecting the rights of the minority are not unimportant, in fact, I think they're quite important. The problem is, first of all, this unprecedented abuse that we've seen by the current minority. But also, I think you protect the public from their electoral choices. I actually like free markets, and I think that the marketplace of ideas, a free society, a self-governed nation, will respond differently if we weren't protecting them from legislation with the 60-vote margin. So 60-vote total. Well, that's just my basic philosophy.
Well, you just used one of my. I have a hobby horse where everybody likes to complain all the time. Oh, DC's so terrible. It's like, well, who do you think's electing these idiots? It's us. Right?
Self-governed and system.
Everybody complains about the government. I've been arguing, I think we're getting exactly the government we deserve. We've been voting for these people. We're following for all the stuff they say is for our benefit. Everything they're doing is to curry favor with us. And it must be working because most of them are getting reelected. So where's the problem? Maybe that makes sense. Let's let the voters, directly suffer the consequences of their own cast ballots, and then maybe, I don't know, right. Things will change a little bit. I don't know, but an interesting debate.
It's a good discussion.
Yeah, it is. Kevin, thanks for your time, as always.
Always a pleasure. Thanks, Rob.
That's it for today's Plain Talk podcast. Can I ask you for a favor? If you're listening to this on a platform that allows ratings and reviews of podcasts, something like Stitcher, something like iTunes or Apple Podcasts, would you leave an honest rating or review? It really helps get this show out. It really helps, and I guess all the different algorithms and everything that these platforms use to recommend podcasts to other people who might be interested in it. They use those ratings. They use those reviews. So I'm not asking you to go on and just, give me a perfect rating or whatever. Just leave what you honestly feel. I would certainly appreciate that. If you have any feedback for the show or you want to send in questions for our weekly guest, Senator Kevin Cramer, Congressman Kelly Armstrong, you can do that at rob@sayanythingblog.com. Also, use that email address if you're having trouble listening to this podcast. If it's not available on a certain platform that you want to use, I would love to help you with that. Just email away. Or if you got a tip on a story or whatever, use that email address. If in doubt, send me the email. I really don't mind. Follow me on social media, Twitter @RobPort, Facebook @RobPort. You can find me, just search for Rob Port on Facebook. Say Anything Blog has accounts on Twitter and Facebook as well, so follow those pages. And thanks for listening. I really appreciate it. We'll talk again.